Refuse, this is only the beginning of my true resurrection.
Arriving on a nightmare, praying for a dream.
True resurrection.
So, I just finished a book, an awesome book.
Everything is awesome.
There were plenty of elements to make it an all-around good story, one of which being it is the first book to make me cry since Wendy Lawton's Ransom's Mark, and I was like 12. This book was atmospheric, descriptive, it had an interesting storyline, and it was very, very original. The characters were relatable, they were easy to understand and empathize with. The theme... But one thing about this got me thinking, why so many other books I pick out to read seem to read flat? I mean, sure, they might have interesting stories, full fleshed out characters, and a descriptive world. They have all of their bases covered, but I'm still not feeling it. But something feels like it's holding me at arm's length from the story. Even some stories I thought were really well written and interesting left me floating on the surface rather than allowing me to dive deep into the grit of the story. Something is keeping the story hidden in the shadows to avoid being seen, trying to blend into everything else that is completely ordinary, to remove the risk of drawing their readers too close. But after reading Patrick Ness's first book in the Chaos Walking series, I think I have finally figured out what I felt has been missing. This is kind of the opposite video to the first part that I did on After, and how too much of the author's personality coming through in its characters can hint at certain biases and prejudices that are too prominent to not be suspicious as to who they might actually belong.
The whole thing is highly suspect.
And I repeat, not every personality you read in a book is completely the author's. There is such a thing as skill and talent to be able to give your story and characters their own personalities to exploit later on for further development, move the plot, or fit with the theme. The first thing I think anyone looks for when starting a new book is tone. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically the attitude with which the writer addresses the reader through writing style. Is your book light and comedic, like an awkward erotica? Is your book dark and foreboding, atmospheric enough to fill your reader with a sense of dread that one can only find in horror? Or maybe you're going for the slice of life feel that you can only find in new adult romance. Or a Korean drama. Or a kooky down-to-earth American comedy.
Yo, Rumsfeld!
Awesome.
Tone is meant to create the atmosphere for the reader to really get into the right worldview for your story, and without it, you're just giving the schematics. It's sort of meant to set the mood, get you to feel a certain way to help immerse you into the story. Without the proper tone, you may leave your reader feeling ungrounded and unanchored. You're not just at arm's length, they're standing on the opposite side of the street listening to you monologue. Beach reads are meant to be light and fluffy, and they actually use lighter tones so the reader doesn't feel obligated to be immersed in a story they only brought to the beach to, well, let's face it, to pretend they're not checking out those six-packs springing out from the surf. While tone is meant to set your mood, the author's mood while writing is meant to give the book its personality. Which is why if you're kind of down in the dumps, it might be difficult to write the next chapter in your slapstick comedy. Adding personality to your book makes it a little more fun and almost interactive. It's sharing your story rather than merely telling it how it is. The best examples I can think of when it comes to writing personality into a story would be Patrick Ness's The Knife of Never Letting Go. This book practically bleeds enough of it to make you cry. And I did. Several times. Any of Laurie Halse Anderson's novels, while they might be a little bit heavy, not only keep with the tone but allow you to get into the head of the main character, and most importantly, understand where they're coming from. Firecracker by David Iserson, while controversial, presents the perfect point of view for a misunderstood teen girl trying to take control of circumstances she has no real say in. And I don't care what you guys say, The Unbecoming of Mara Dyer will forever be a favorite of mine. Personality is kind of like the fun that you put into your story. It's that joke that you shared between two characters you thought was hilarious. It's describing the moon and relating the cold of night to a character's struggle. It's the mode of descriptive flow that you lead your characters with when searching in vain for a lost love. An individual's personality makes them unique to who they are, and the same goes for writing. We want to give our stories that certain uniqueness that will make them stand out from the rest. Personality is most easily attained by breaking that fourth wall to include the reader as if the MC already knows they're there. It brings them closer into the story to give them a better idea of what's going on, and just like opening up in the real world, one reason it's difficult to do is that it's difficult to maintain that balance. The easiest way for a writer to get across the personality of the story is to write in first person. If written in third person, you might have to rely on narration to break through that fourth wall. Tone is very important, but I do feel that it's the only thing that writers really worry about. But adding personality on top of that has become somewhat of a forgotten skill. Not only can it be seen as reckless or extra, but it's also been deemed a risk since it means not everyone will be able to adapt to the story and relate to it. Just like how every person is unique and might not be able to make friends with everyone they meet, not every book is going to get along with everyone. It's not going to be all people's cup of tea. Some people don't even drink tea. Some of us barbarians are too addicted to coffee. It's difficult for us to accept our stories won't be beloved by all, but it is another reality we have to eventually face and realize that it's up to us to decide what road we want to take our stories in. Do we want to water down the personality to attempt to relate to a larger group of people for the betterment of our careers and attempts at success? Creating the right tone is hard enough as it is. One draft might have too many adjectives, the next not enough, or there's too much dialogue that stalls the plot and too little movement to keep the reader's attention. However, one might think with all these obstacles to overcome that personality isn't a risk worth taking, and I say the opposite. It's not technically a necessity in the writing world. It's just more frosting on top of the good stuff. Most might even admit that they would rather have more people read their works because they're drawn into the stories, instead of taking that risk to draw in a niche audience and quite possibly never see sales go up. Similarly to any art, when it becomes adopted into business to take on a more career-oriented goal, a lot of people are actually scared to delve too deep into anything that might make them feel like they aren't enough. Things that are meant to challenge our insecurities and frame of mind mostly exist in the art world. Writing, whether a book or a screenplay or even a poem, can make anyone feel uncomfortable if it challenges their way of thinking. Despite so many audiences claiming they are open-minded, I find that the opposite is true. We're being told to conform to societal standards rather than to be ourselves, but then we're brought up to believe we should present ourselves in the way only we ever could. Nobody sees the world the same as you, and that is the truth. And nobody is exactly the same. I don't blame publishers, editors, or writers individually for this, but I think that the industry itself has turned writing into too much of a business rather than an art form. That's not to say that they don't care about stories or authors or readers, but stories are being written so similar to one another within their designated genre for the sake of sales. And while this is completely understandable in the light of reason, there really isn't a successful way to market and hold on to that special kind of tick that is every writer's individual style, preferences, and writing quirks. It's hard enough trying to make it in the world of art no matter how talented or skilled one may be, but the one thing that people do notice eventually is persistence. With persistence comes growth. Your work will get increasingly better the more time and effort you put into it. The object in today's book industry isn't to find that one person, it's to find as many as possible, and this go with the flow mentality has somewhat stripped writers of the creative freedom in hopes of bettering sales to rival their successors. The thing that happens with anything that floods a market, however, is that the audience will eventually get bored. The movie industry alone has stripped comedic quirks and personality at risk of offending people, and their stories come off as bland, generic, and boring. I think another part of the problem is insecurity. The idea of letting ourselves shine through our characters to light up a page can seem daunting. This is why when someone expresses their dislike of our work, we take it so personally. It's not just the rejection of a story we took the time to write. It feels like a rejection of our very selves. But this fear of rejection can only be battled by overcoming our insecurities and choosing to make things better and clearer the next time around. My advice to you is not to focus on the numbers. I know it's difficult in the new age of social media marketing, but if you really want to write a good story, you need to lose this.